This is the story of two friends from college who came up with a crazy idea of inviting the greatest thinkers on earth to prove God in just 500 words. They didn't expect to get any responses, but they did. Ambassadors, senators, movie stars, captains of industry, scientists, media personalities, and more. They put 71-page essays in a book, which became a bestseller on Amazon, called Elevator Pitches for God.
Not about just learning Torah and doing mitzvot. That's a means to an end. Our job is to finish the job that Abraham started 3,700 years ago. It's to take that incredible system of wisdom and values and laws that we got from the creator of the universe, to teach ourselves, to teach others, to create families and communities and societies and a country in the Middle East called Israel based on those values, and to produce the role model. Because if you do it right, people will just flock to you and they'll follow us. But if we don't start recognizing that it's not about surviving and preventing intermarriage and assimilation, it's not about keeping our children from, God forbid, interacting with things outside of us that might damage us, but it's about being on the offense and being out there as a good role model.
Welcome to our podcast, Elevator Pitches for God. I am so excited to have one of my favorite people in the world today with us. We have with us Rabbi Ken Spiro, one of the great historians of the world. I can't say enough about Ken because I love his stuff. I've read his books. I've watched, in fact, his podcast, which is called Remember What's Next, is one of my absolute, besides the Parsha podcast, which is at torchweb.org, Rabbi Wolbe. This is the podcast. It gives me the most pleasure because Ken, he puts things into perspective. He takes world history, which means you go up and you get that 30,000 foot view of what's really happening in the world. So you can really see how Kodesh Baruch Hu, how the Almighty, blessed be He, is running the world. It's amazing. All you have to do is go up higher and see what's moving around. And I have to say that with Ken, I was having trouble with belief, but once you start studying Jewish history, this was a huge piece of the puzzle that was placed in place where I went, I guess there is something going on up there. Someone is running the world that absolutely has a purpose. And Ken is the guy that brought that out to me. So if you haven't heard about Ken, go to kenspiro.com. By the way, his history series is second to none. I think I've heard it 3 times. Again, Remember What's Next is currently what's happening. If you want current events, which, I want to hear every word Ken has to say. Also, Ken happens to be one of the 70 authors who wrote for our book that we put together, which was, we asked him for proof of God in just 1 page. And here it is. See that? Elevator Pitches for God, 70 essays. We asked 70 different people from different religions. It's not religious, just to say, prove God, 1 page, 500 words. Ken also wrote a great book. Sorry, Ken, I'm going on so long, but I just love your stuff. World Perfect. If you think that the Greeks and the Romans and everyone else put together Western society, you've been misled. Yes, they left their babies on the hillside to die. They did all kinds of things. And the stuff we have today is not from the Greeks and the Romans. It was from the Bible. It was from the Bible given to Moses on Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago in 1313 BCE. But anyway, and is there anything else you want to say? Oh, by the way, he's been on the BBC. Oh, I didn't even mention. He studied Russian at the Pushkin Institute. He's been on the BBC, National Geographic Channel, the Discovery Channel, the History Channel. I mean, this is so long I could go on and on. Anyway, welcome, Ken Spiro.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I think my mother must have given you all that information about me.
No. I've harassed you so long. I've been just coming up behind, Ken this, Ken that. You got to be in the book. You got to be this. Because I love your stuff. Your stuff really puts it into perspective. And I'm just so
I appreciate it.
Gratified. I can talk to you in person. So we have a lot. Today is the 1st of Av, 2024. It's a very interesting day. We have Iran that is threatening to attack Israel because it took out some of its Hamas's top commander and, of course, their commanders. We have 4 carrier groups, U.S. carrier groups around the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea right now, which includes many more ships than just 4. Anyway, it's a very, very dynamic time. We could talk about that if you want. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, first of all, I'm here in Jerusalem, so I'm on the front lines. I'm looking at April 15th, the last time Iran decided to shoot a few missiles at us. I love Israel gets always attacked for proportionality, even though no country in the world has done more in the most difficult military situation in the world, with the enemy dug underground using its population as human shields, lowest probably casualty figure for combatants versus civilians ever in urban warfare, in any warfare situation, yet Israel's always accused of disproportionality. Meanwhile, last time we killed one guy in Iran and they launched 300 ballistic and cruise missiles at us. Notice there was no UN resolutions condemning them,
Right.
and no pundits accusing us of disproportionate response to Israel taking out
Well, the UN has also
one guy.
criticized Israel for winning too many medals in the Olympics, which are going on right now. It wasn't proportional
Exactly.
because I think Israel's won 22, and I think all the Arab countries combined have won like 2. So they're pissed about that. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you're in Jerusalem. Also, the stock market is crashing here. Not crashing, whatever. We'll call it an adjustment. It's a better term. The Nikkei adjusted overnight. Also, so big things are happening today. There's a lot in the air. What are your feelings? Anything on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the world is a great state of flux in general. That there's a lot of instability in the world. This is a very unique period of time. I'm a student. I wear 2 hats, Ron. I'm like the rabbi, and I believe there's a higher power in human affairs. That's why it's called his story. But I also am a historian, and I like to combine the two because we are the people who brought into the world the concept called determinism, that there's a God who acts in history, not like the cynical Greek and Roman pagans gods of the ancient world who just used and abused you and didn't really care about what went on down here unless it was for their own benefit. We believe that history is a controlled process leading to a destination, and that the whole world, we, the Jewish people, because our great-grandpa Abraham chose for us, 3,700 years ago, a very unique responsibility to teach the world. Like you mentioned, when you're talking about with some books I wrote, we brought the idea of one God and one absolute standard of morality into the world, and that's the idea that, hands down, is the most transformative, impactful idea, not only in terms of spirituality and religion, but in terms of morality and values. So we believe that, every human being on the planet Earth is part of this story, but we, the Jewish people, have been chosen for unique responsibility to be in the center of what's going on. So it makes complete sense to me, since we understand that history from the Jewish perspective is moving towards a certain destination, which is the whole world getting back, so to speak, to the garden of humanity living together in peace under the idea of one God, a loving God, and one rule, one playbook for all of humanity. All these different people fighting and arguing about, but God tells us what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. We're moving back towards that. It's been the job of the Jewish people to get the world back to that goal. And that could be a very rocky road. And just like in all the great Hollywood epics, the climax of the story, the hero's journey, he always meets, Luke Skywalker meets Darth Vader, or Harry Potter meets Voldemort, or whoever. Neo has the showdown in the Matrix. It's always at the end. And we're approaching that end. That's the term we call, the Messianic era, which is an idea that Christianity and Islam have picked up from us. But that's the transitional period as we approach the end of the entire story. And clearly, if you look what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on there, instability, whether it's political instability, whether it's economic instability, or whether it's lack of leadership in the world, whether it's the collapse of values, the obfuscation of truth, it's all part of, as we say in Hebrew, the big balagan, the craziness, the storm, the final showdown, all that before the smoke clears, and everything. So it's a very challenging and even dangerous time for the Jewish people in Israel. And I would totally expect to see, as someone who believes in this scenario, and I believe it's easily provable this is what's going on, that we would expect to see the same thing happening in the world. It's not going to be that Israel's in turmoil and being threatened less than 80 years after the Holocaust with destruction by another member state of the United Nations, and the whole rest of the world is going to be sitting back and ignoring it. Okay, when the Olympics end in a few days, everyone's going to go back to focusing on this. So it's like that old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And like I always say, I hate to be too cliche, but Dickens said it in The Tale of Two Cities, it's the best of times and the worst of times. Big things are over the horizons, but we got a lot of difficult stuff facing the Jewish people, facing Israel, and facing man. We got to hold on to our hats and hold the course.
You said something on October 8th, I think it was, before anything had happened, before Israel really did much of anything. And it sounded so weird at the time, and it turned out to be a real accurate prediction. You said, this is going to unleash anti-Semitism like I've never seen before. And it was an odd prediction. It's like, wait a minute, Israel's attacked, its citizens are massacred in the most gruesome way, babies are put in ovens. It's stuff that we can't even repeat on air and say what they did. And I hope anyone who listens to this does their research and finds out what they really did, because it's beyond anything I've ever even heard before. And you said, and I'm thinking, really, wouldn't there be sympathy for this, a country, anyone, people that are attacked in this gruesome manner? And you were right. It unleashed anti-Semitism against the people who were being slaughtered. It was crazy. How did you know that?
Because again, I'm a student of history and I know what happens. First of all, Dara Horn wrote a book called People Love Dead Jews. Interesting title for a book. I bought the book. It wasn't what I expected it to be, but I've been saying this for years. The world prefers us as victims, not victors. What was shocking to me was how quickly it spun over, like Sydney Opera House, and they're ahead of us in Australia. On October 7th, it was happening in the morning here. It was already late afternoon, evening there. They lit up the Opera House in blue and white, in support of Israel. And the same day, and this is all being pushed by this toxic, intersectional, radical Islamism that's spread throughout the world with large populations now in every Western city, combined with the intersectional kind of woke extreme left, totally misreading the story of what Israel's about, colonial occupier of the indigenous Palestinians and all that. But what we saw was an immediate evaporation. After that, it took 6 million Jews dying for the world to feel sorry enough for us. If there's any silver lining in the Holocaust, it's that the UN was able to vote November 29, 1947, 33-13 with 10 abstentions to partition Palestine. And I always say that fast forward to a little less than 80 years, we're approaching 80 years since the end of World War II, that residual sympathy has worn off, along with the guilt. There's a line there's a line I heard, it's cynical, but it says, Germany's never forgiven the Jews for the Holocaust. People are really kind of sick of being thrown that Holocaust anti-Semitism thing at them. So if we can turn the Jews into the Nazis and make them be, even though it's a complete misreading and a distortion of history and reality and fact, and Israel does nothing like that, then we can stop feeling guilty for what we did to them in the first place.
Right.
And we can just undo the mistake we made by creating a Jewish state in the first place. I'm not saying the whole world feels this way. Israel has very strong allies, some Western democracies and governments, and certainly in the evangelical pro-Israel Christian community. But a good chunk of the world, which is very loud, very vociferous, and very weird, that the only thing that a radical Islamist and a LGBTQ person, left-winger, would get along with, would agree on, is that they both hate the Jewish people. So the fact that it was unleashed so fast is what surprised me. Literally, it was less than 24 hours. And the fact that it metastasized, and I use that word specifically, into no one's calling for, we need a two-state solution now because there's going to be no peace for the poor Palestinians, even though it's a lie built on a distortion, built on a complete whatever. They're just calling for the destruction of Israel from the river to the sea, even though half the people screaming and have no idea what river and what sea they're talking. So this is a pattern we've seen. This is all part of that bigger question of what drives anti-Semitism. And this was just a fantastic pretext. What was so shocking was I was at least expecting it when Israel reacted to start being accused of disproportionate response, and etc. That it came out so fast, precisely because of this toxic combination of these radical Islamic minorities that are embedded in all these Western cities, combined with the insanity of the extreme left. That was shocking to me.
Yeah. You brought up the evangelist population. One of my favorite shows to watch about news in Israel is the CBN, Christian Broadcast Network. These guys are so pro-Israel and so, they're great. And they have several stations that go on and talk about that. Why don't you tell people don't know you, they don't know what you've written. Why don't you tell them, we can start anywhere. Some predictions in the Bible that the Bible made that were so unlikely, such long shots, and that all of them have come true. That's fun. These impossible predictions, or what else? Whatever else that's extraordinary. Some of your top hits that when people hear it, again, I know all this stuff, but they don't know any of this.
Yeah, so my personal background was, I'm not raised religious at all. I was raised Reformed, not observant. I always tell people on Passover, we had ham and cheese on matzah. If someone had told me,
no way, did you really?
Yes, we really did. My son, by the way, it's so funny, Ron, you're saying that, because when I told that to my kids, my oldest son is now 30, he's like 39 years old. When I told my son that years ago, as a little kid, he said, "Dad, why'd you bother with the matzah?" I said, "It was Passover. We couldn't have bread."
That's true.
But this, I was raised, in New Rochelle, New York, like a secular Jew, not Zionist. I had a Jewish identity. We had Hanukkah, we had Passover, but my view, they say man proposes and God laughs. My plan was to do international business. I went to Vassar undergrad. I studied Russian language and literature and Japanese. Back then, those were hot languages for international business. And I was going to go make a lot of money. And then I ended up going to Russia as a graduate student to get my Russian fluent, and ended up hanging out during the Soviet Union with all these Jews who were secretly learning Judaism and risking their lives, when I used to do, growing up, anything I could to get thrown out of after school Hebrew school. I said, there's got to be more to this Jewish stuff. So that took me on this journey, which was supposed to take me to kibbutz, but ended me plopping me into Aish Torah in Jerusalem, what should have been 3 months, but would turn now into 6 months and 42 years. And then I ended up staying and studying in yeshiva and getting smicha and becoming a rabbi and getting a master's degree in history and becoming a licensed tour guide. But the point is, my story is kind of like, it's a mini reflection of like what history is about. We have our own ideas, and then there's always a bigger plan running in the background. And all of, whether it's our own personal history or human history, is always an interplay between the things we want to do and God, who really controls the story. I mean, we can take a look. How we get to the end is up to us. The long way, the short way, the quick way, the slow way, the hard way, the easy way. But we'll get there. But it depends based on the decisions we make. So I never planned any of this. It's someone had told me growing up, you're going to be Orthodox Jewish rabbi living in Israel. I would have said, not any of those things were on my radar. So what lit me up? Because I'm a very eclectic person. I'm interested in a lot of things. The two things I like the most are actually physics and history. I would have been a physicist, except I stink at math. But I love cosmology, and because those things always science always brought me to this. Like when I look at the universe, I was an astronomy nut as a little kid. I even ground my own telescope, 6-inch mirror for my reflector telescope when I was a teenager. I always thought the vastness of the universe was so cool, and history always interested me. And when I was in the process of my journey, never wanting to be observant, never thinking in a million years I'd keep Shabbat, my mother used to tell me, "I know you're religious when you stop eating shrimp." So, but when I started looking at really history, Jewish history, and realizing how unbelievably weird it is. I mean, you think about it, Ron. We're one of the oldest surviving people on the planet Earth. There's very few people who have been around. Okay, we've lost a lot of Jews, and a lot of people have joined us, but we have, people have been writing this since October 7th. Jews are the only people who speak the same language with the same faith in this, in the same capital city, in the same homeland, like for 3,000 years. But we who are one of the oldest people, one of the richest cultures and most impactful ideas in history, are shockingly ignorant of everything about who we are, everything about our history. So when I started looking into it, I was just like, and I really just like, I've always loved history, and I'm totally self-taught. I have a master's degree in history, but it was more basically just writing a thesis. But everything I know, I think this holds true for most of us. The things you remember in this world after, 20 years after high school and college are what we learn on our own, are interesting.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And are interest, and things we're going to use in life, as opposed to a lot of things we just learned and forgot after the exams. But it just struck me as all of Jewish history is such a weird combination of implausible, impossible, contradictory phenomenon. The fact that you and I are having this conversation now, that was two Jews that are thousands of miles apart, that's a wonder of technology, but that I'm sitting in Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people, a reunited city, after 2,000 years of exile, having survived the most endlessly long, difficult, irrational, violent hatred in human history. And the Holocaust, October 7th was just one of the more horrible but more recent examples of what has plagued us literally for thousands of years. But being bounced from country to country, being a stateless nation, living at the mercy of other people, yet preserving our faith, outlasting these people, coming back to our homeland. And despite the fact that we were exposed to the greatest
the longest, most irrational, universal hatred in human history that we have been able to directly and often indirectly, because we're not into proselytizing. We never had any empire. We understand how the Greeks and Romans changed the world. And they did do good stuff. They did a lot of bad stuff too, but we tend not to look at that. But they had empires. They conquered the world and they stuffed their values and their technology and their ideas down other people's throats, and that's how they impacted the world. And I say the only Jewish empire in history has been Hollywood. And we make it very hard to convert. So how do we do it? And I say we did it by just having a system, a spiritual, moral, ethical, societal system that worked better than anyone else's. And we often did it in the worst possible situations. We did it best at the worst possible times, living in exile, with no power, with no rights, with no money. And people forget, Jews are disproportionately impactful people in the world today. And yeah, Hollywood, we have a lot of influence. Although God knows they're not using it for Jewish stuff.
No, they're not.
If Jews in Hollywood use their influence for Jewish stuff, the whole world would be Jewish by now. We'd all be eating bagels, lox, and cream cheese on Sunday, and Israel would have plenty of support in the world. That's not what's going on. So when you look at it all together, it literally makes no sense. You can look at each little piece separately and go, that's interesting, that's weird. But when you holistically look, and this is what I like to do. This is what I like to do when I compare what's going on now, what happened in the past. And this is what I like to do when I look at history. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. When we see who we are, what we've been through, what we've accomplished, how we've survived, how we've reestablished ourselves. Some of these things are completely unique. Multiple exiles, coming back and reestablishing your homeland, the same piece of real estate for 2,000 years. Okay, for sure. For us, it's like, yeah, normal. Like David Ben-Gurion said, to be a realist as a Jew, you have to believe in miracles. But that's what really lit me up. And the more I looked at it, and it wasn't from a rabbi sitting in a room with me, learning the Bible with me, or telling me that, if I don't believe in God or keep Shabbat, I'm going to get zapped by a bolt of lightning. I just objectively stood back and I said, because there's always a part of every human being that's pushing back against all this stuff. Because the consequences of living with the reality of this is, wow, this really changes my view of everything.
It really does.
Not just randomly.
Yeah. It's hard to swallow at first. You're saying, well, wait a minute. You're telling me right now there's a force that's acting to bring me. There's this other force is invisible to us. And, I wake up now. I'm almost pretty sure, I'm almost there. But then I find all those data points and go, you know what? There really is. And the Christians actually, I think, have an easier time knowing it. They're very good. But we Jews were made, we're stiff-necked people. We're people, we even God said you're stiff-necked. You're really stubborn, which is good. Like you point out, it's got us through many times, because if we weren't so stubborn, we wouldn't be here. So it's a good and it's bad. Yeah. So you want to quote Blaise Pascal and Mark Twain. Tell them all those great quotes from non-Jewish sources about their observation of the same thing, because it's not like we're the only ones who, our Jewish historians have noticed this. But believe me, actually, is it fair to say, I think Jews don't get it at all? Actually, I'm in a very secular area. We probably have, I know we have 450,000 Jews in the Bay. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, in my area, in my town here, which is probably 10,000 Jews, I don't know, we're taking a guess, maybe 12 are observant, maybe. And I know 3 of them. I don't know who the other 9 are, but I'm sure they're there. But no, so speak about what the non-Jews have said, and then we could talk about Jewish ignorance.
First of all, Ron, it's funny you say that, because whenever I'm teaching, I'm doing a presentation, I always say, you quote Jews talking about Jews, no one believes it. He's biased. When a non-Jew says it,
then we all believe it, right? No, we'll give it. Well, Bilam,
it's funny you mentioned Bilam. I bought a book years ago. It's a huge, thick book. It's called "What Did They Think of the Jews?" And some of these people love us. Some of these people are neutral on us. Some of them despise us. But they all see there's something there. A lot of times they see the same thing. They just see it in different ways. It's like someone talking about how pushy and aggressive Jews are, and the same different person saying, "Look at how accomplished the Jews are because they're so, revolutionary,
pushy and aggressive.
They're so pushy and aggressive." So it's all a matter of how you look at it. Sometimes the people who hate us the most, like a Hitler, he would agree 100% with some of the best compliments ever given to the Jewish people. It's just how you choose to react to them. It's not how you understand who we are. But like you said, a guy like Blaise Pascal, who's one of the great French Enlightenment philosophers, there's a story about him having a conversation with Louis XIV in the 17th century. And this is the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. The superstitious spirituality is being pushed aside by science and fact and reason. And Louis XIV asks Pascal, show me proof of the supernatural. And if you read his essay called Pensies, he says, basically, I'm paraphrasing it, but he says the fact that the Jewish people had survived until the 17th century, there's no explanation for it. And I have at least, 15 quotes of famous non-Jews. Like you mentioned Mark Twain. I don't have the quote in front of me, but he basically says, and I think it's pretty much the quote, he says, what is the secret of his immortality? That's pretty much the exact quote. I think I missed a word or two in there. But he's saying is unbelievable. He says all these great empires come and go. He says the Jews saw them all and beat them all. We're still here, and we've lost a lot of Jews, but we're still going strong. We are just, like the fact that since 1901, we Jews, who are 0.2% of the world's population, have won 22% of all the Nobel Prizes, which is 11,500% more than we should have, is crazy stuff. But we're like, yeah, sure, we're Jews. We do that stuff. We just do it. So it's kind of like when you're living through something, it's really amazing. You don't like historical events that are transformative. When you're living through them, you don't see the impact of them. When you live amongst the people who are so overaccomplished, not all Jews. First of all, it's non-Jews who are accomplished people. We don't have a monopoly on it. We're disproportionately so. You kind of get used to it, and we think, sure, that's just being Jewish. So sometimes it takes a non-Jew who's objective from outside looking at us. Churchill said some people hate the Jews and some people love them, but anyone who knows them can't deny that they're the most formidable race that had ever inhabited the planet Earth. This is Churchill saying it. But you have Eugene Goering, who's one of Hitler's intellectual role models. He says the Roman Empire in half a millennia didn't come close to the transformative impact that Semitism, which was, that's the word that was introduced, to the whole idea of when the phrase came out in the 19th century to make Jews sound more racial and less religious, but that Semitism had on the world. So these are people who don't even like us, but they're saying exactly that. I always say when Hitler seeing these quotes, like the famous John Adams quote, "The Jew has done more to civilize men than any other nation on the planet Earth." He talks about the Romans. Adams, second president of the United States, the Roman Empire was but a bubble in comparison to the Jews. They have driven religion to 3/4 of the world and influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. That's the second president of the United States. I always say Adolf Hitler, reading that quote, would he agree or disagree with it? He would totally agree with that quote. He's not evil because of his understanding of who we are. I say a guy like Hitler understands Jews better than most Jews understand Jews.
Right. His speech to the Reichstag, I think he pointed out.
Sorry?
His speech to the Reichstag. Did you talk about that?
He's always... That's not me. I don't talk about that, but I know the speech. But he's always talking about the transformative impact of the Jewish people. And he says the war for domination of the world we fought entirely between us, between Germans and Jews. All else is facade and illusion. Even when we have driven the Jew out of Germany, he remains our world enemy. Remember, Jews in Germany are 0.6% of the population of Germany prior to World War II.
And we really still piss them off.
But he realizes that the power of the Jew is not our physical size.
No.
We didn't have a state then. It's just the transformative power of us as a people to change the collective consciousness of humanity. That's what really scares these people. And that's what a lot of non-Jews see. Some love it, some hate it, some are neutral on it, but they see it, and we have to step back and appreciate it. And when I started looking at our history through their eyes and through kind of objective standards of fact and what is normative history, and not using our history as the baseline, because it's like using supernatural to judge supernatural is not going to work. When you use natural to judge supernatural, then you see how weird it is.
Yeah. Hitler would agree. Hitler understood, and he said this to the Reichstag. Now this is a secret, that he understood that it is the soul of the Jew that we're born with. He said you could have no Hebrew schools, you could have nothing. If you have a Jewish soul, just one that's left over, and that's why he wanted to kill every one of us. He said they're going to change the world, and that's and like you just said, there's two ways to react to us. Either you go, wow, and sit back and say, I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, they're rich, they're poor, whatever they want to, we're colonialists, whatever you hate at the time, you accuse the Jews of being, but we're also the opposite. So you could, you're not being intellectually honest. We start where you're communists. Oh, no, you're also capitalists. I mean, we're accused of both sides of the, and we are probably both sides. It's true. But someone said something that I thought was pretty cool. They said, whether you like to or not, in this area, we have so many Jews, and most of them are very ignorant, I think, in terms of what Judaism is. We drag along our God, whether we realize it or not. And I think every Jew does that. When they walk in a room, they're dragging along God. And even if it's not their intention, they do it. And that's quite apparent to the non-Jewish crowd, where I don't think we see that. That's one of our blind spots. Is that fair to say, would you say?
There's a guy, Ernst Vandenhag, who was an American Dutch sociologist in the 1960s. He wrote a book called The Jewish Mystique, and he talks exactly about this. He says some Jews call themselves communists and some Jews call themselves capitalists. He says, but every Jew, no matter how much he denies it, the Jewishness is embedded in that personality, which is why, haters of Jews don't care if you're an Orthodox Jew or a completely secular Jew. They understand, as Hitler says, that, that even if there'd never been a Hebrew school, the Jewish person, it's within every single Jew. There's no Jew, not a single one, who does not personify this. He calls Jews super spreaders. He said, even without any Hebrew school, he said, every Jew has got this little Jewish soul that is pushing him or her to always try and transform the world in a certain way. And if they're not doing it through the traditional Jewish historical mission of bringing God into the world, those God-given values, then they will naturally gravitate towards or create political ideologies to try and fix the world's problems, like communism, or take any cause to make the world a better place. In the last 150 plus years, communism, socialism, feminism, black civil rights, anti-apartheid, Doctors Without Borders, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. If it isn't founded by a Jew, and it usually is, it's run by Jews, because it's in our spiritual DNA. And even, the way I say it, Ron, is we're like hardware. Jews are kind of hotwired. I have a whole presentation on my website you can watch. It's called Driven. And it's about the Jewish spiritual DNA. There's like the hardware package, which is what's in our bodies. And then there's the software package, which is not the soul, but that's the Torah, which we put in. The brain's the hardware, And so a Jew without the Torah software still has these basic kind of spiritual DNA traits. Radically transformative thinking. Non-Jews can have, but Jews disproportionately have it. Vandenhag says in his book, out of 100 radicals, 5 might be Jewish. But out of 10 radicals, 5 are likely to, instead of 100 Jews, instead of 100 Jews, 5 may be radicals, but out of 10 radicals, 5 are likely to be Jewish. This is why are Jews so radical? Because it's in our spiritual DNA. Abraham, in a world where everyone is worshiping idols, thinks outside the box in a radically transformative way and is able to connect to an infinite invisible being. That's like pretty radical thinking. Jonathan Sacks, the late great, former chief rabbi of England, Lord Rabbi Doctor. His mother was so happy, he had so many titles. He wrote a great book called Radical Now. Radical Then, Radical Now. And then, like we said, what does it take to push radically transformative ideas on the world? The world is full of people with great ideas who are too afraid to say them or don't have the energy to push them. That's the drive. That's the chutzpah. That's the stiff neck stuff. That all is a package. Even the Midrash, which is rabbinic commentary on the Bible, it says, it says there's 3 who are inherently chutzpahdik: the dog amongst the animals, the rooster amongst the birds, and the Jew amongst the nations. You might think this is pretty, stiff neck. It's called that. It's called and that exact Midrash, we're called stiff neck. It says you might think this is something negative, but it's really positive, because a Jew would rather be hanged than give up his Judaism. To push radically transformative ideas on the world, you have to want truth regardless of consequences. That's the drive. And the third thing is Jews care. Non-Jews can care too, but Jews are crazy about caring. That's why 52% of Jews in the Pew study they did in 2012, 2010, whatever, when they said the word Jew to Jews, the first word out of their mouth was commitment to social justice. Because for Jews who don't have the Torah software, we're hardwired, like Abraham was, to care about the world, want to fix the world and bring the world to a better place. So these are those traits we have, which can make us very obnoxious and aggressive. You hang out with Jews. You're hanging on the West Coast there. I always tell people, you never try us an El Al flight. El Al is like mini Israel. It's like 350 Jews stuffed into a little space with a flight attendant giving you advice. But spend a week or two in Israel and then go. I once flew from Israel to Indianapolis, Indiana. I changed planes in New York and I'm standing in the airport just waiting to be picked up. And I'm thinking, Gentiles. I'm not saying anything negative about non-Jews. It's like a relaxation mantra because
Yeah.
we are the energy we have is so great. This is who we are. This is what those non-Jews see. This is why we are. And you put that drive, that Jewish hardware, with that software, boy, is it transformative. But without it, they're still, like you say, Jewish. A guy like a Bernie Sanders, who is one of the most dangerous people in the United States for Israel, and I think his ideology is personally crazy, but he is so Jewish. Forget the way he speaks with his New York accent. But it's unbelievable how Woody Allen, another great example, with all of his weird neuroses and everything, such a Jewish personality. So you see it no matter what. It's always in who we are. That Jewish personality type is embedded in us as a people. The question is how you use it. To do that, you got to have the right software package.
I'm thinking of so many things as you're talking. Woody Allen is a very honest atheist. If you read what he writes in Atheism, it's some of the best stuff, I think. I was thinking about the ignorance of so many Jews out here. We have many other different types of Judaism that have been introduced. And I find them so destructive because it's locked everyone into this ignorance. Like they're only watching one channel and the channel is feeding them stuff that it's completely not true. It wouldn't pass Rambam, which is one of our great sages. He had 13 tests of Judaism to know if it's heretical or not. And you can't check, it doesn't match up with any of these things that I'm thinking. And it's what's happening is we're receiving massive assimilation. We're losing. It's a complete destructive to the Jewish people. It's happening right under their noses in a sense, and they don't even know it. How do you feel about that? I mean, that's what we're fighting. I feel like we're in a frontier here in California. I brought this up on the Insiders podcast and torchweb.org. Do you have any? Do you have any opinion on this? Do you agree with this? Am I bringing up something that I shouldn't worry about? Is the Almighty going to take care of this? I hope He is, because there's not much we can do.
No, we should be very worried about it. We should be, the fact that we are. I always say this, that the non-Jewish world has never been able to kill us off. No matter how much they try, we outlast all these civilizations and empires that try and destroy us. And I shouldn't be letting the secret out of the bag, but we just read recently a Torah portion called Balak, and it's about the prophet Bilam, who was hired. This is about to enter the land of Israel, and all the nations, the Moabites, and the Midianites, they're all trying to keep us from entering the land because they know once we get in there, that's it. So they're trying to beat us militarily. They fail at that. So then they try and delegitimize us. This is exactly what goes on in the world today. 48, 67, 73. So then they switch tactics. Okay, we realize we can't in a conventional war beat Israel. So now we're going to go after
those numbers he was reading were years of wars. The wars that other nations, mostly all of them around Israel, have attacked the tiny state of Israel.
Exactly. 1950 War of Independence, 6-Day War, War, whatever. So now we'll switch tack, and this is what you've seen has happened in the last 50 plus years, is now we're going to delegitimize Israel. We're going to turn what was the David, surrounded by 22 Arab states, we're going to turn the David into the Goliath and make the Palestinians the David. We're going to flip the whole thing over. And that also, despite all the attempts and the incredible delegitimization, the fact that the UN has condemned Israel more than every other country in the world combined in the last 50 years, that didn't work. But you look at the last thing that Bilam does, he said, darn, I couldn't do it. He tells them, send in the Midianite like women. They'll use their lure. They'll lure them in with their bodies to get them to worship idols. To basically spiritually commit suicide. And then God will turn their back on us. And that's really like the paradigm for what has happened in history. When the non-Jewish world hasn't been able to destroy us physically, we've outlasted all those empires. Like Mark Twain said, the Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian, they're gone. They've tried to delegitimize us. They're still trying that. But the greatest weapon, and again, I feel bad I'm letting this out of the bag here, but if they want to get rid of us, just leave us alone. Just let us make lots of money and with no restrictions so we can interact, because we're much better at killing ourselves off through assimilation and intermarriage than the non-Jewish world. The rate of intermarriage in the Jewish world today is 70% plus. to the point where, I don't believe the story is going to go out for another 20, 30 years. But if you go 30 years from now, 40 years from now, there's going to be pretty much no one but Orthodox Jews left in the Jewish world in the United States.
Right.
It's actual complete demographic. Combine that with the ridiculously low birth rates of, non-Orthodox Jewish women in America in general, in the Western world in general, the birth rates are way below replacement rate. But American Jewish women have like the lowest birth rate. So we are but the real important point I want to remember is we cannot, it's like Noah's Ark. There's a great, Noah, it says Noah was a righteous man in his time. That's how the Bible begins that story. And all the rabbis jump on that. And Rashi, the great medieval commentator from France 1,000 years ago, he says, does that mean had he lived in Abraham's time, he would have been more righteous or less? And there's a whole, like everything in Judaism is opinions. But I always teach, my perspective is that Noah was in his time a good guy in a world that really was messed up. But he spent a long time making a boat. He got on it. He had the timeline's like 100 years he's making the boat, and why isn't he out there like trying to get the world to wake up and make some followers like Abraham was doing? He got thrown into like a fiery furnace for like, he wouldn't shut up. This is truth and this is a lie and I'm not going to shut my mouth. So it's not enough. And I believe that the religious Jewish world, to a very great extent, is acting much more like Noah than Abraham. And that's I'm trying to get some pushback on that one. When they're on the life road, they're thinking, I'm in Lakewood, I'm in Pico Robertson, I'm in Bathurst and something in Northwest London, and even in Jerusalem in my Mea Shearim neighborhood. And the fact that, in Israel, it's a little harder to intermarry, to assimilate and disappear because there's not a lot of non-Jews to marry, and it's a Jewish state, but you can't be on the boat and let everyone else drown. We Jews have a responsibility towards our fellow Jews, and we, the Jewish people collective, have a responsibility towards the world. And if we're not even taking care of our fellow Jews, how are we supposed to be that role model for the rest of the world? So the problem is, and this is the other thing I would throw in, is using my rabbi historian perspective. If you think about it, Ron, the greatest explosion, what drives racism and intolerance is the dislike of people who are different from you. Nothing you and I, but he's black, I'm white. I don't like that. I'm suspicious. He's too different from me. So the more you become, obviously, if you're black, you can't become white usually. But the more you become like the majority, the less you're hated to, you should be allowed to assimilate. So disappear. I'll become more and more like you. There'll be less and less restrictions. I'll be more and more comfortably in your world as a minority in a majority culture. And eventually I'll just be gone. That's the story of so many peoples throughout history. What is so supernatural, speaking about, we talked about how weird Jewish history is, the highs and the lows. It's not only the good stuff, the Nobel Prizes and coming back to our land. The bad stuff, the fact that the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism have pretty much always taken place in places where we are most comfortable, which doesn't necessarily mean even assimilating. It's just that we're too comfortable living outside our homeland and just like getting used to being out there when our goal, we're a unique tree that can only be planted in one soil that will allow us to sprout the fruit we need to, and that's the land of Israel. So even living as Orthodox Jews in Lakewood, New Jersey, there is no long-term future for Jews in diaspora, period. This is a non-debatable fact. And God is shutting the diaspora down now. And we've seen, whether it was the Jews in Egypt who were almost completely assimilated, and then boom, you had the slavery and a century of horrendous persecution of Jews and enslavement like Auschwitz for an entire century, or whether it's Jews in Spain who are not assimilating in that method. There's a lot of forced conversion, but way too comfortable in that incredible high culture. Or whether it's Jews in Germany before the Holocaust, where no one was more German than German Jews. Or whether it's Jews in America who have been blessed with being able to live in a unique period of time in human history in a country that is remarkably tolerant and open to everyone, especially Jews. And you look what's happening. Boom, anti-Semitism is coming out. Boom. And if we think the big guy upstairs is going to allow us to say, my brother, my child, you're going to let your brother disappear spiritually and commit like spiritual suicide while you stand by and watch, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And this is what we see happening now. And I mean, to me, it's very clear that we can't get complacent. We need a full court press. And those of us, like Noah on the ark, those of us who do know, what our mission is, we have to refocus on it. It's not about just learning Torah and doing mitzvot. That's a means to an end. Our job is to finish the job that Abraham started 3,700 years ago. It's to take that incredible system of wisdom and values and laws that we got from the creator of the universe, to teach ourselves, to teach others, to create families and communities and societies and a country in the Middle East called Israel based on those values, and to produce a role model. Because if you do it right, people will just flock to you and they'll follow us. But if we don't start recognizing that it's not about surviving and preventing intermarriage and assimilation, it's not about keeping our children from, God forbid, interacting with things outside of us that might damage us, but it's about being on the deep offense and being out there as a good role model, I think we're in for a lot of trouble. We're in for a very dangerous period of time. And a place like California, you live in the place where I use one of the best examples. You have one of the biggest Jewish communities in the United States, one of the most accomplished, probably the highest concentration of super educated, creative people is in the Bay Area. And it is one of the greatest Jewish deserts in terms of disconnect from Torah, where the religion has become left-wing political ideologies and intersectional stuff and whatever. Crazy. Look at all the potential. And by the way, right, it's not a zero-sum game. You have to all be like learning with black hats in yeshiva, or you can be a Jew who's connected to his Judaism and learning and living it, and you can be a Jew who's also engaged in the world and achieving in your career and impacting the world and interacting with that world. But if you're strong in that core, you bring on the outside world, we can all deal with it. You and I, who are people who came back to it, we've been there and done that, so it's not elusive to us. The problem is a lot of the Jewish world that has never been out there is very scared of what might happen to them or their children if they get exposed to that. I like history. I love military history. You know, the Romans said it the best: "Sivi pacem pari bellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. Ask Alexander the Great, ask Ariel Sharon, ask Judah Maccabee. The best defense is always a really good offense. You know, also ask Ulysses S. Grant. I would agree.
I just read a tweet by Ambassador Friedman. He's the ambassador that moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And he said, really, America is there to defend Israel as long as Israel has no offense. And he said, so this is like a football game. If you have one team that can't do any offense, they can only do defense, which team would you bet on?
Exactly.
They're not going to get any points. You have to bet on the other one. Isn't anti-Semitism the Almighty's way of bringing the Jews back to Israel? And I mean, isn't that's what it has been used?
Well, look, you know, you're delving into what is one of the most emotionally difficult topics to deal with, which is, you know, because that means like the Holocaust, God, so like I said before, all of human history is an interplay between God's infinite knowledge and control and what we do. So when the bad stuff happens, to say anything that happens is outside of God's knowledge or control, and is therefore not the will of God, is an incredibly flawed way. It would be called, I hate to use the word heresy because it sounds like medieval Christianity, but it's completely heretical and illogical thought. If God is all good, all powerful, and all knowing, and not to get into a whole class on suffering and bad things happening to good people and our very narrow perspective versus what God sees and all that stuff, we understand that the good and the bad, the highs and the lows, it's all under the knowledge and control of the creator of the universe, but it is this dance that he's doing with humanity in general and the Jewish people specifically. So, you know, like the people always say, I say before you can ask where was God in the Holocaust, you have to ask where was man, first of all. That's an obvious point. That happens at the height of enlightened Western European society, the most technologically, culturally, governmentally advanced country in Europe, probably the best educated population. And look, they what do they use all that knowledge for? I mean, horrible mechanized mass murder. So you got to ask where was man, because humanity without God is not able to do it. But you can say one of the side benefits, like I said, of anti-Semitism, which is sort of what I was talking about before, the fact that the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism take place in places where we seem to be so comfortable and everything is going so well, there's no question in my mind that it's clearly the big guy upstairs telling him, my children, your role in history is too important. Humanity is not going to get this done without you doing it. And if you give up on your faith and your connection and your mission and you decide to join them, what, I need more of them? No, there's only a few of you. You're 0.2% of the world's population. You got to wake up, and you got to, and this, by the way, is a very common pattern. You see, by the way, in Israel after October 7th, the huge spiritual reawakening in Israel is unbelievable. You watch these soldiers going into battle, most of the units not religious, but they're all doing Shema Yisrael and singing these songs, and so people at a certain level, it's, you know what, it's interesting, Ron. For people who actually believe it's the God who runs the world, the very difficult emotional, ethical questions and philosophical questions about suffering and God are less of a problem. You know, I have a collection of books called letters from Jews throughout the ages. And it's just someone who collected random letters that wasn't, and just found them in different places. And some of them are absolutely unbelievable. People talking about their children slaughtered in the Khmelnytsky massacres in Poland, or a woman writing about the false messiah Shabtai Tzvi in the 16th century. And you never see once from any of these letters. Some of these people are talking about the murder of their own families. None of them ever say, "Where's God? It's not fair." It's really interesting. I just noticed this. What most of them say is it's because we did not keep our side of the contractual agreement with the big guy upstairs to have a certain mission in the world, that this is happening to us. It's precisely the period of time in human history. And of course, I'm not judging people who go through horribly traumatic. A person who loses his family in the Holocaust, who am I to judge how they react to where's God? That's very easy for me to say. But it's interesting precisely at this time in history, when so much of the Jewish world, the largest percentage ever, has moved away from God, that people are asking all these questions now. And the people who seem to be more within that world and understand it holistically have less trouble dealing with it. But those people who are in the world, we recognize the fact that it was said by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. I believe it's the one-sentence, single best description of what drives anti-Semitism. The quote is attributed to him and other people, but I say it in his name. He was a great European rabbi from the early 19th century. He said, when Jews don't make Kiddush, Gentiles make Havdalah. And Kiddush and Havdalah are the ceremonies we make at the beginning of Shabbat, at the end of Shabbat, the Sabbath. When we bring the Sabbath in, we go from the lower 6 days of the week to the higher spiritual level of Shabbat. And that's a higher level. It's like a higher level spiritual level. We're not closer. And then at the end, we go down to the normal workaday week, which begins on Sunday in the Jewish calendar. And both are made on wine, Kiddush and Havdalah. And when Chaim Volozhin is saying this, he doesn't mean it literally. He says when we don't make Kiddush, meaning Kiddush Hashem, when we don't live and act in a way, when we're not balanced Jews in our relationship with each other and with God, and we're living properly as we are as Jews, and being role models for what really good human beings is supposed to be like individually and collectively, we don't do that. And like I said, the best way to change people is to just be real. If you're real with who you are and you're doing it well, like I said, imitation is the highest form of flattery. Like I said before, if it wasn't for us just having social welfare infrastructure in a world that didn't have any rates of literacy far higher than anyone else, a concept of a future and a deterministic worldview and a loving God that was so much more empowering and positive and proactive, the world wouldn't have come. It wasn't because they loved us. The Romans didn't like us, yet we got them through Christianity to buy into the idea of one God. So when we don't proactively, not go out and preach to people and try and convert them and conquer them, no, but just focus on what our mission is and be those role models, the world will be full of the opposite values. Those opposite values are evil. When evil comes into the world, it's going to target us. And all goes back to the point you were saying. This is the ultimate message. Like, God's saying, my children, you got to do it. Look at the situation the world is today. Look at how the lack of values in the world. Look at how, forget that we don't even know morally what's right anymore. We're challenging biological realities. That's how crazy the world is now.
Yeah.
And that is because, but ultimately, it's our fault. It's our responsibility is what it's really about. It's our responsibility. And if we started this whole conversation about the world being out of whack, when we as a people, and I'm not just saying all start keeping Shabbat, no. When the religious Jews in the world, we all get clear as a collective that we're all part of one nation. We like Rabbi Israel Meir Lau said it best. He said, Auschwitz is the largest Jewish cemetery in the world. There's 1.5 million, the ashes of 1.5 million Jews buried in Auschwitz. He said, we're very good at dying together. We have to learn how to live together. We have to make a collective change in our how we look at each other and recognize we don't have to agree on everything. That's never going to happen. Not even when the Messiah comes, we're all going to agree. But we got to recognize that you're my brother, you're my sister. I don't have to agree with you, but I don't have to always like you, but I got to love you. I always say that because any parent who has teenagers knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I know what
Don't
you're
always like your
exactly
kids,
so much.
but if you didn't love them, you'd sell them or something. Like
Yeah.
Roseanne Barr said, now that I have teenagers, I realize why some mammals eat their young. But we need to have a collective paradigm switch, and the responsibility starts not with the secular, but with the religious, who have a greater level of knowledge and therefore responsibility, to rebrand who we are as a people, to be the God Squad, to start proactively showing the world how the world's supposed to run based on that system, to be welcoming and inclusive, and walk the walk and talk the talk and create the role model for the world. And then we come together, and then the world, I always say, will stop fighting us. They'll actually stop. They'll look at us and they go, hey, what are these guys doing? We got to do it with them. What's your secret? And then they'll stop. They'll not only stop fighting us, they'll support us. We're going to learn. That's the messianic view. The whole
Please
quote from
God,
Isaiah,
soon in our days.
Yeah, the Isaiah says, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established upon the mountains and exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow into it. And people will say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and out of Zion will come forth Torah and the word of from Jerusalem. We should see it soon and in our days, because boy, is God throwing a bucket of ice water in the face of Israel, the face of the Jewish people through anti-Semitism, and the face of the world through all the insanity and the instability that's going on.
Amen. I can't think of a better way to end our program than that. I want to thank Rabbi Spiro for coming on. I want to encourage all of you to go to kenspiro.com, listen to his talks, his history podcast, pick up a copy of World Perfect, put it on your bookcase and read it, and give it to your friends. What other things are happening? Remember what's next?
Crash course in Jewish history. As a history book I wrote. We got to learn our history. That's the best way to start learning it.
Yes. When you read it, it's totally readable. It's not like may his name be a blessing, Paul Johnson. It's not going to take you 2 years to get through it. It'll take you, a day or two, and you'll be so much more wise coming out of it, realizing that you see the big plan. Anyway, Ken, thank you for staying up. I know it's now it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night in Jerusalem, and may you have nothing but blessings and success, and may we all come out of this thing with Iran really and soon.
Amen. We should have good news for the Jews and the world. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay.